Shut up and sit down.
Welcome to episode 10 of Voiceover Histories. I'm Katie Aiken, and this is the docuseries that shines a light on the people, the projects, and the stories from the voiceover industry of days gone by. In this episode, we're exploring another voiceover origin story. In episode 2, we looked into the first use of voiceover in animation, but today, join me to discover the first use of voiceover in audiobooks. Telling stories, and more relevantly, listening to stories, is one of the oldest forms of entertainment. Both the publishing industry and audiobooks have been susceptible to changes in technology and cultural shifts over the years. To massively condense history on this subject, stories began as oral traditions. Then they were printed into books. And now, audiobooks are the increasingly chosen medium for audiences consuming stories. This surely indicates a return to the sheer enjoyment of hearing stories aloud. Before we get into the actual origin story of voiceover in audiobooks, which takes place in the 1930s, let's go a little further back to when the intention of audiobooks first happened. That takes us back to the 1870s. Here's a familiar name for you, but not one we've come to associate with audiobooks. Thomas Edison. With his invention of the phonograph, Edison had scores of plans for what was possible, one of which was phonographic books. After sampling the phonograph himself, recording the nursery rhyme, "Mary Had a Little Lamb,"
Mary had a little lamb, its fleece was white as snow, and everywhere that Mary went, the lamb was sure to go.
he later demonstrated his invention at the Royal Institution in 1878. The demonstration included recordings of another children's rhyme, "Hey Diddle Diddle, the Cat and the Fiddle," and a line of poetry by Tennyson. Now granted, this wasn't exactly an audiobook, but it certainly defines the dawn of an important technology and the foresight of applying it to the written word as a form of audible entertainment. In fact, Edison did propose using the phonograph to record Nicholas Nickleby by Charles Dickens, so that would have been the first ever audiobook, but the technology just wasn't up to it yet. The recording would have been held on wax cylinders, which didn't have good sound quality to start off with, but also wore down quickly after maybe 20 or so plays. They only held about 2 minutes worth of spoken word and couldn't be mass-produced since no method to duplicate the cylinders existed. All in all, not really suitable for full-length audiobooks. However, at the same time over in Germany, a bookseller was focused on applying synthesized voices to a similar medium. In 1878, in the village of Sonneberg in Germany, bookseller Theodor Brand received a patent for his speaking picture book. The book had images of different animals, with a corresponding knob that activated the synthesized voice of the animal or human. The audiobook of sorts was published in multiple languages and was a worldwide commercial hit. Fast forward half a century later to the 1930s, and we find full-length novels being recorded. In 1932, the American Foundation for the Blind and the Library of Congress Books for the Blind Project established the Talking Book Program, creating records of books on a set of vinyl gramophone records. As the name of the group suggests, these audiobooks were intended for people with visual disabilities, which included those born blind or with degenerative sight problems, as well as the added number of soldiers returning from the First World War who had damaged or lost their sight during their service. Up to 25 minutes of speech could be recorded using LP records that rotated at a much slower speed than more traditional records. This meant that the average novel required 10 records to cover the full recording. A little fun fact for you, LP records were originally used for this purpose, quite a while before they were used for music, which we associate them with now. The first music to be used on LPs was in 1948.
The Works Progress Administration has established a project for making talking book machines for the blind. 5,000 of these talking book machines have been made, and they will be distributed into the homes of the blind of America by the libraries of America in the same way that you receive your books in the home. This is one of the most comfortable ways of reading that I know of, and may be envied by those who have their own sight. The person who suggested this project and is responsible for it is Miss Helen Keller, not only the most outstanding sightless person in America, but one of the Republic's foremost citizens.
The first audiobooks were posted in America in 1934 and included the Bible and patriotic documents such as the Declaration of Independence, as well as fictional works such as Very Good Jeeves by P.G. Wodehouse, The Brushwood Boy by Rudyard Kipling, and The Diary of a Provincial Lady by E.M. Delafield. The first audiobooks in Britain went out 1 year later in 1935, beginning with The Murder of Roger Ackroyd by Agatha Christie and Typhoon by Joseph Conrad.
Ever of opinion that the honest man who married and brought up a large family did more service than he who continued single and only talked of population. From this motive, I had scarce taken orders a year before I began to think seriously of matrimony, and chose my wife as she did her wedding gown, not for a fine glossy surface, but such qualities as would wear well.
The very first person to lend their voice to talking books was actor John Knight, who ended up narrating 97 of the first 165 books. Not only does he hold the distinction as the first audiobook voiceover and narrator, but upon his death in 1964, he left money to the Library of Congress, which was used to build a new tape recording studio at the library's division for the blind and physically handicapped. The 1950s is the last installment of important dates in audiobook firsts. In 1952, Caedmon Records was formed, known as the first company to sell spoken word records to the public, and therefore pioneering audiobooks as an industry. The first release was by Dylan Thomas, reading out a collection of his poems. On the B-side was also a story read by Dylan Thomas, called A Child's Christmas in Wales, which is now one of his most beloved works. It was this that was credited as having launched Caedmon Records to success. The oral tradition of listening to stories is a tale as old as time in and of itself, and the fact that the idea of audiobooks as entertainment has roots at least half a century older than the actual production of them suggests that they have long been considered an inevitable success as both a product and a business. But it is an industry that has had to wait for technology to catch up. Out of all the different industries that use voiceover, it's certainly plausible that audiobooks were the first that visionaries back in the day knew would one day come. How remarkable it is to live in an age where that has come to fruition, and how exciting it is to look to the future of where audiobooks and voiceover artistry will go from here. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Voiceover Histories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. If you really liked it, please consider sharing it with anyone who you think might also enjoy it. Your support really helps get the word out there, and I really appreciate it. Until next time, bye-bye.